we live in a world, in a country at a time where the culture itself has sort of collapsed. And I believe it's collapsed on the emptiness that was left by our losing our faith in God. I think as faith kind of bled out of the modern world, it created an emptiness where Christianity used to be, and our culture has kind of collapsed inward.
There are two interesting things happening in our culture at once right now. On the one hand, we have the reawakening of the cultural Christians, which we've covered here on the show. People like Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who wrote a very viral landmark essay for us at Unheard about 18 months ago called Why I Am Now a Christian. She's since talked about that also at the Dissident Dialogues with Unheard in conversation with Richard Dawkins. We talked about with Alex O'Connor, the debate he moderated between Richard Dawkins and Jordan Peterson, where they had a conversation kind of about what cultural Christianity is from both of their perspectives, and where they see the tensions between both of their perspectives on that. This is something that's happening. There are reports of Easter conversions in certain strains of Christianity where there was just a very high level of people at particular churches and in particular denominations coming to Christ. There's something going on. On the other hand, perhaps one of the biggest obsessions in popular culture right now is true crime. True crime is dominant, and particularly with women. Advertisers have looked at this. Millennial women are obsessed with true crime. Docuseries, podcasts routinely rank at the top of the most streamed shows, whether that's on video platforms or audio platforms. We can't get enough of it. And I've talked about this a lot because I've thought about it a lot as somebody who, I guess, a millennial woman who watches a lot of true crime. I have my own theories on it, but let's bring in somebody who actually just devoted an entire book to understanding our culture, understanding humanities, understanding the artist's obsession with murder. Our friend Andrew Klavan wrote The Kingdom of Cain, Finding God in the Literature of Darkness. And I have to tell you, I'm so excited for everyone to watch this interview. I'll read a little bit of the description of the book, but it says he looks at 3 murders in history, including the first murder, Cain's killing of his brother Abel, and at the art created from imaginative engagement with those horrific events by artists ranging from Dostoevsky to Alfred Hitchcock, to make beauty out of the world as it is, shot through with evil and injustice and suffering, is the task not just of the artist, but Klavan argues, of every life rightly lived. Examining how that transformation occurs in art grants us a vision for how it can happen in our lives. And I think also, to the modern person who reads this description or hears this description, especially the line where it says, to make beauty out of the world as it is, shot through with evil and injustice and suffering. There's something going on right now that I think has partially sparked our obsession with true crime, informed by exactly that. Technology has made it impossible for us to look away from all of the evil and injustice and suffering that is happening in every corner of the globe, basically at every minute of the day. You used to be sort of tethered to your community. You used to be confronted with the evil and injustice and suffering in your physical surroundings, and then it sort of became people that you could react to over newspapers, or circumstances that you would be familiar with over newspapers. For example, serialized accounts of what was happening as Western explorers went through Africa. These things tickled the imagination, and then it became video. And now it's not just television, it's not just cable television, it's social media, and it's in your pocket every minute of the day from every corner of the world. And we're really, I think, being forced to confront the reality of evil and injustice and suffering with such stark, aggressive confrontation. This is a stark and aggressive confrontation, I should say. And that's why this book, I couldn't be more excited to talk to Andrew Klavan about what he wrote and how he thinks it explains the world around us as it is now and as it always has been. So Andrew Klavan, host of The Andrew Klavan Show, and the author of The Kingdom of Cain, Finding God in the Literature of Darkness, among many other books, is back on the show. Andrew, thanks for being here. Did you know that when your metabolism is working well, everything just feels better, your energy, your workouts, even your sleep? If you want a better handle on your health, you should try out Lumen. Lumen is super cool. It is the first handheld metabolic coach. You breathe into it, and it actually tells you if your body is burning fat or carbs. I love doing it. Then it gives you daily guidance like how to eat, move, and recover based on your unique metabolism. Every morning, I take a quick breath test and Lumen shows me exactly where I'm at. Again, it is very cool. Am I in fat burn mode, running on carbs? From there, it gives me a plan that fits me, not a generic diet or guesswork. And it's not just about food. It helps me manage workout, sleep, even stress. Honestly, understanding my metabolism has been a game changer, especially with warmer months coming. It's the perfect time to tune into your body. It's very cool because you can see the correlation between how you feel and the number on the screen. So head to lumen.me/undercurrents for 15% off your Lumen. That's lumen.me/undercurrents. Thanks to Lumen for sponsoring this episode.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this book is so cool. It's called The Kingdom of Cain, Finding God in the Literature of Darkness. And it comes at a time when a lot of people do appear to be, quote, finding God amidst a lot of darkness in the culture. And I feel like that's reflected. You can kind of tell that this book was written in that milieu. And I wanted to just get your take on that. Andrew, as the person who actually wrote the book, do you feel like that's sort of what was percolating as you sat down to think about some of this?
For me, the world is always kind of dark. It's just a question of
Mm.
where you are. It's like the weather. There's always a storm of evil going on somewhere. And I think one of the things that's happened in America is we've been incredibly blessed to keep a lot of stuff off our native soil. And now some of that has been encroaching. So yeah, I do think that shadow has fallen over us in a way it's fallen over other people throughout history. But for me, I think part of the inspiration for this work was just a kind of fresh awareness of how dark the world actually is. I think because if you're in a nice place, if you're doing well personally, if you're healthy, it becomes very easy to think that life is grand, where somewhere some evil is always taking place. And when I hear people, for instance, stand up and say, I'm standing on land that used to be owned by the Chippewa, I kind of laugh and I think if you're not giving it back, just shut up because everybody's standing on land that used to belong to somebody because that's the way the world is. And so it was really just addressing a kind of fresh awareness in myself of just how dark and corrupt humanity is on a kind of ongoing basis. And and because I write about that, my all my novels are about corruption and evil and murder. And I'm always being asked, like, how can you write about such things? You call yourself a Christian. How can you write about such things? I just think that Christians who don't write about such things, who don't face that music, are actually missing the whole point of the belief system, which starts with a tragedy and basically says that life is a place where if when God comes down, we kill him, And I think that's a pretty dark view of life, and it's not the view of life you get from most Christian literature.
Well, let's start with that place of darkness and with the archetype of Cain. I'm curious, Aaron Renn talks about the negative world and Roger has the Benedict option. So I think we're aware that as a society, we may be kind of ignorant of some of these, I think, really foundational stories and texts and archetypes. So if you could walk us through why you start with Cain and then at risk of maybe sounding reductionist, is there somebody right now who's sort of front and center in the popular imagination who maybe fits the Cain archetype?
Well, I think I start with Cain because I think that the murder of Abel by Cain, is the first thing that happens in history. If history is starts with the fall of man, with being kicked out of Eden, where you have to assume that history was, if not non-existent, was entirely different. If history starts with the killing of Abel by Cain, that murder sets the pattern of all of history. And what I look at is what writing was inspired and what art and what movies were inspired by certain murders. And when I look at Cain and Abel, I look through the entire Old Testament and see that brother battle, that tension between who's supposed to get power and who wants power and who rises to power goes on for all of the Bible. Every generation has a new brother battle. Whether it's the sons of Abraham or the sons of Isaac or the sons or David himself, the King David himself and his brothers. There's always this battle between older and younger brothers, and I think that sets a pattern for all of history. That sense that you have something that I want, I'm going to come after what you want, what you have, and I'm going to take it away, and I'm going to become better by making you less. I think that that is absolutely the system that is in place in the human heart. And so I think that it comes again and again. And I think when you have, I mean, look, I don't want to in that context, in the context of evil, I think there's evil on right and left. I don't think there's more evil on the right than there is on the left. But I think right now the left is the philosophy of envy. The idea that if you have something, it's unfair. If there are more whites in your business than blacks have been cheated. If anything, if there's any inequality between male and female, it can't be because men and women are different. You literally can get fired from a university for saying that. It can't just be built into the system that there are inequalities. There must be something bad being done or going on. And my feeling is no. I think that this is actually, what Solzhenitsyn said, that the dividing line between good and evil runs right through every human heart, and there's nothing that anybody's going to do that's going to change that. There's no system that's going to be put in place that's going to change that. It means that each one of us has to sort of confront the evil within himself. And I think that's one of the themes of the Cain and Abel story. When you have brothers fighting with each other, you also have symbolically people fighting with the darkness in themselves. And so I think that the themes of Cain and Abel just bleed through all of history, and certainly in this moment, they're very present.
There are many great Catholic thinkers who would pinpoint maybe the decline of the West to, well, maybe the printing press, but also to Rousseau, and non Catholic thinkers who point to this as well. And the Solzhenitsyn line is very much an argument with Rousseau. And I guess I'm curious, Andrew, if this is something that is a do you see this as something that is cyclical and circular, or is there in the West at least, dare I say, a maybe a historical dialectic at play where you go from you go through historic examples yourself. So you go through historic examples of literature. Are those building off of each other to an end point? Or are we all always just kind of circling back to this tension between Rousseau and Solzhenitsyn? How do you see that playing out?
I think there's definitely a tension between what you're essentially talking about is the tension between those who say, this is creation and I now have a responsibility to respond to creation, and people who say, no, we are a perfectible race in a perfectible situation. There essentially is no God. It is up to us to make everything absolutely great. And as Albert Camus, the French philosopher, pointed out, once you say that, you are headed on a path to murder. Because I mean, you can do this experiment at home. You just lock yourself in a room and start to imagine how you would make the world perfect. And within 2 minutes, you will be killing people in your mind. Within 2 minutes, you'll be saying, well, first we got to get rid of these people, and we'll just, vanish these people, and they're going to disappear. Once you take control of the world and take control away from God, which is the story of the fall of man, you are going to become murderers. And so, yeah, that is definitely an instinct in people that if I could just get rid of this person or that, the world would become perfect. And that doesn't matter whether it's your unwanted baby or your spouse or, in fact, an entire race of people or another country. Once you start to take responsibility for the perfection of the world, instead of realizing that you live in a fallen world and you have to develop a response to that, you are going to become drenched in blood. And the difference between people who believe in freedom and people who don't believe in freedom is that people who believe in freedom know that they're heading into a world of trouble, and people who don't believe in freedom think it can be fixed by just doing this, or this. And it's just not so.
I have a random question, and I feel like you will have an answer to this, so bear with me. But secular humanists right now, Richard Dawkins, for example, seem to be grappling with what they always sort of based their secular humanism on, which was, I think they found a lot of justification in the Stoics for saying there's nothing particular unique about Christianity. This was something that was in the works in the West and in the East, that we protect the weak and that you have to do moral good. And even pointing back to the Old Testament, that this was building already, that nobody needed Jesus to create the forces of Christianity that Tom Holland and others argue were singular, that there's never been anything quite like it. And I'm curious what the Stoics would say about this point on Cain, about this point on envy. Is there something that comes just from the Judeo-Christian tradition, or was there sort of other wisdom historically bouncing around in the human mind about that too?
Well, even though the Christians were capable of taking, as Christians have always been able to do, they've taken some of the wisdom of Stoicism and including it in the Christian package. There is a major, major difference between Christianity and Stoicism. I mean, there are a lot of differences, but there's a really core difference, which is the Stoics are continually saying, oh, well, death and pain don't really matter. They don't really matter. It's really a question of how you face them. It's your character. Why do you even worry about death when, we all die? It's just something you have to get through. That's not Christianity at all. Christianity has a deep, deep feeling for the suffering of human beings that begins with Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane, sweating blood, weeping blood because of the terror of crucifixion. And this idea that your suffering is somehow part of the creation, part of the system by which God calls you to Himself, is just inherent in Christianity. And one of the things I've always found, even though I admire a lot of Stoic philosophy, one of the things that I've always found really frustrating about it is this kind of shrug it gives to suffering, as if it was somehow your fault for even caring that you were suffering. In the same way, I practiced in my youth Zen Buddhism for many, many years, and I became frustrated with that idea that somehow if you could just get rid of your desires, if you could just get rid of your ambitions and the things you want, you would stop suffering. Whereas Christianity says, no, immerse yourself in life and then find out what that suffering means. Take up your cross and follow me, Jesus says, which is to say that the suffering is going to be in your life, and it is going to be a part of your life that God can relate to. God has been through this. He has come to suffer with you, not to tell you that your suffering doesn't matter, which is a really big difference. And so that feeling that we have, I mean, if these people are right, that we would just have stumbled on the idea of loving the infirm and the weak, and of women's rights, which I think is unique among Christian ideology. Not the idea, not the leftist idea that women and men are the same, but that women are uniquely valuable as women, and that they're the fact that men are stronger, the fact that men can hurt them, the fact that men can enslave them, is actually a call to nobility in men. That to me is unique to Christian thought, and it begins in the Gospels themselves, where women are called to Christ in great numbers and are among his supporters. It's just not true. It is obviously easy after any miracle, after any event. It's obviously easy to say that would have happened otherwise. I remember dear liberal friends and I who used to get into shouting matches over whether the Soviet Union would have fallen without Reagan. And I used to say, go back and look, and nobody thought it could fall except for Reagan. Well, nobody had the kind of courage to say it's the weak in whom you should see God. Until Christianity came, and it has held kings to ever since. And so I just think that there is this kind of unique idea of suffering and evil as being part of the history of salvation. They're not obviously built into creation. God doesn't want creation to be evil, but still, that is something that has happened, and somehow, what do they call it? The great tragedy, the great gift or something of the tragedy of the fall, that it somehow makes salvation even more beautiful. And it's the beauty. This is why I'm writing in the Kingdom of Cain, why I'm writing about evil and art, murder and art, is because art makes things beautiful. In Macbeth, you have all this horror and terror and killing, and yet the play itself is beautiful. And that to me suggests that what God is doing is creating a work of beauty even out of the terrible things that fallen man does. And I think that that's the answer to the question that non-believers have, is how can there be a good God and so much evil? The answer is not, oh, well, everything happens for a reason, or because man is naturally bad, or anything like that. It is because there is some pattern of beauty that we can't fully recognize, and yet shows itself in the arts, that we can't fully recognize that God is working out in even in this dark world. That's why I think art is so important. That's why I think beauty is so important, and why Dostoevsky says it was beauty that would save the world.
Well, I was actually just going to ask. So this brings us to Raskolnikov and Psycho and East of Eden, where you have people who are sort of finding catharsis in the material world and trying to sort of dismiss the eternal. And it's almost Gnostic that the suffering of the physical body, and it's a weird way to think about Psycho, but rather than putting your hope in the afterlife or something greater, he's trying to put his hope in the material, in the most grotesque imaginable way. And I wonder what you think, Andrew. Maybe if we just focus particularly on American art, because it's sort of a can of worms, a fascinating one, but to open up Russian art. But Steinbeck and Hitchcock, what are they dealing with in their times, particularly that you think nudged them to consider these things? Hitchcock certainly with Rope as well, which is so Nietzschean and Dostoevsky. It's sort of inspired by those previous works.
Yeah, well, one of the murders I look at in Kingdom of Cain, which is all just murders that inspire artists, but one of them is the Leopold and Loeb murder, which people have forgotten now, but it took place in the 1920s and was called the crime of the century at the time. And it was two young men who had a very brilliant young men who had everything in life except obviously maybe some love, but they had they grew up in a very wealthy community. They went to college as young at the age of 15. They were brilliant, and they began to have this kind of sick sexual relationship with each other. And one of them fell in love with the philosophy of Nietzsche. And what's funny about this is I mean, funny in a morbid way, but it's almost a sort of dance, because what I start with, the book Kingdom of Cain starts with a murder by a guy named Lacenaire. That murder inspired Dostoevsky to write Crime and Punishment.
Hmm.
Dostoevsky inspired Nietzsche in his philosophy, and Nietzsche's philosophy, the idea that now that God was dead, a Superman would have to come along to create a new morality. That inspired Leopold and Loeb to create yet another murder. And Leopold and Loeb convinced themselves that they were Nietzschean Supermen, and they were going to commit the perfect crime simply because they could, simply because they were that brilliant, and they were going to outsmart everybody. And they killed at random this little boy they knew from the neighborhood, dumped his body in near a waterway, and were captured by the Chicago police within a week. They were and confessed immediately. So these supermen, these super brilliant supermen, were absolutely outsmarted by a bunch of Chicago flatfoots, right away, disproving Nietzsche's theory on them in the moment. And
They caught Jesse Smollett eventually.
yeah, yes, exactly. So that murder inspired the play Rope, which Hitchcock then makes into a movie. And by that time, Nietzsche had also become an inspiration to the Nazis. And so the meaning of this murder, of this Leopold and Loeb murder, now becomes global. That
Hmm.
there's a super race, and the race has the right to eliminate what they consider to be an inferior race. The Jews has the right to take over every country around because they are supermen. And at this point, I mean, in World War I, German soldiers were given Nietzsche's philosophy books to take into the trenches with them. And so this entire philosophy has now essentially destroyed a civilization, starting with that one murder that inspires Dostoevsky, who inspires Nietzsche, who inspires this murder, which now becomes a sort of trademark of the Nazis. And it is this almost wonderful and horrible
Hmm.
way in which an idea works its way into a civilization and works its way out in a civilization. And Hitchcock caught on to that. I mean, he understood that. He understood that the things that make people go awry are often ideas or a sense of self, a mistaken sense of self that plays itself out in destroying another life, in
Oh.
destroying another complete universe of being that each life represents. And so, artists bring this out of the murder. Murders are I've covered murders as a reporter. They are a grim, sad, ugly little thing almost always. They don't have any of the romance that they have in the movies. But when artists get hold of them, they become representative of something that has gone wrong in the soul of man. And in revealing that, the work of art that reveals it becomes beautiful in itself. So you watch Psycho, which is essentially the first slasher film, and it's a horrific film, and yet there is this incredible arcane beauty to it that brings something out of this moment, and it is a moment about, if you watch the movie carefully, it is a moment about a woman's redemption and how that redemption is destroyed by a murderer. And Hitchcock is really emphasizing the humanity of the victim. He's actually showing you what that murder is evil because life is sacred. And that is the thing. This is why, as a priest will tell you, and any priest will tell you, the devil is always being frustrated because even his evil points to the beauty of creation. And I think that's what happens in movies, even horror movies sometimes, if they are honest and if they are done by a great artist like Hitchcock was.
Now, this is actually a great segue to the last question I wanted to ask, Andrew, which is when we think about California, Steinbeck, and Hitchcock, it's interesting that like the next generation of California, roughly speaking, becomes this sort of fascinating cauldron of true crime intrigue and reality. It's not just the intrigue. And thinking about today, there are so many shows, true crime shows, that are particularly focused back on a lot of those murders and a lot of that generation. Also, a lot of sort of modern Canes. And I wanted to just ask you about that. I mean, especially women. Advertisers have looked at this. It is especially gripping to millennial women for whatever reason, to the true crime genre right now on podcasts and in docuseries. When you look at our culture today, as somebody who's just spent a book thinking about all of this, what's going on? Why are we so sort of obsessed with modern Canes?
Well, it's a great question. And it is one of the reasons I wrote Kingdom of Cain was the fascination with true crime and the way in which true crime inspires artists. I mean, an artist say, "Oh, that's an interesting story. I want to make that story into a film or into a book." And I think that this is what people are looking for in true crime. We live in a world in a country at a time where the culture itself has sort of collapsed. And I believe it's collapsed on the emptiness that was left by our losing our faith in God. I think as faith kind of bled out of the modern world, it created an emptiness where Christianity used to be, and our culture has kind of collapsed inward. And the reason people turn to murder it is because it is a borderline. It is the place where you can no longer say good and evil are relative. It's the place where you can no longer say there is no spiritual moral universe that we recognize as morality itself. When you get to murder, and it is really, really interesting. You can talk to people, very, very intelligent people who are atheists. And if you talk to them about why something is evil, they will ultimately have to say to you, well, it's evil because we think it is. But when you face murder, when you really look at murder, you see that no, that's simply not true. It is evil because it's evil. It is evil because life is sacred. It's evil because the inner being adds on to to God's work of creation. And so what I think when people turn to true crime, what they're looking at is they want an artist to come along and make this evil meaningful, but there are no artists because we have lost our faith. And so it's only the faithful art, and the Christian artists are all making, silly movies like God is Not Dead, in which everything turns out great in the end because you have faith in Jesus. And that's not true either. You can have faith in Jesus and the world will still give you trouble, as Jesus himself said. And so what I'm doing is I'm going back to the great artists who took the true crime and turned it into meaningful crime and turned it into a world of meaning and a world of souls. And I think that that's what people are desperately looking for in those true crime stories that don't quite come together because they haven't got an artist to tell them. And I just want to say, if I may, Emily, that like Dostoevsky, who's probably the greatest Christian novelist who ever lived, and was in fact a Christian who earned his Christianity in times of tremendous, tremendous suffering. There is a painting of Jesus dead in a coffin, by I think it's by Holbein. Dostoevsky was so fascinated with this picture that he would sit and look at it until his wife had to come and pull him away from it. And the reason Dostoevsky did that is he wanted to make sure his faith was a real faith, was not a happy talk faith, was not a, I lost my bunny, but Jesus brought it back again faith, but was a faith that could actually look at death and believe in the resurrection. And I think that what we have lost in losing that faith, and there's no question that we have gone through at least a generation where that faith has been absent, and the emptiness has we've paid a price for that emptiness. And what I think is when artists come to murder, when they come to evil and they create true works of art out of evil, they are actually speaking in faith, even if they themselves don't have that faith. And that's why I wanted to look at all these murders that inspired all this art and find out why the art is beautiful. And from that, I mean, and this is where the book goes as it goes toward its end, from that, start to think about what God can make of this world of darkness. What work of art can he make of this world of darkness from his perspective, which is eternal and infinite? And I think that that's what we're all looking for.
I would say so. Andrew Klavan, profound insights as always. This is such an interesting book. Can't recommend it enough. Thank you for your time today.
Always great to talk to you, Emily. Thanks a lot.
Well, I said in the intro before we brought in the brilliant Andrew Klavan that I have my own theories about this, but much preferred to hear his. So while we're here, I might as well just say what my own theory is. I think that we are, especially millennial women, who are in so many cases disproportionate to other eras in history, unmarried, childless, and working fairly cushy laptop 9 to 5 type jobs where you're interfacing with colleagues often through the computer. Even if you're in an office, you do a lot of your work digitally. You lose contact. It feels like you lose contact. You don't actually, but it feels like you lose contact with the world. And I think true crime appeals to a lot of millennial women in particular because it stimulates our human instinct. It stimulates humanity, the humanness in all of us. You're sort of brought into something active. It's kind of like how you hear men occasionally describe their interest in video games as sort of replacing the hunter and the gatherer roles, particularly the hunter roles that men had in previous epics of human history. In that, the male is designed to find great satisfaction in that sort of physical primal hunting and protecting. And when that's gone, you sort of search for simulacrums. And I think in the case of women, there's something about caring that's stimulated, and concern for the other and for the weak that's very often stimulated by true crime. I think plainly one of the best explanations for it, as Andrew just said, these are human stories that will always intrigue us and stimulate us because they are the first murder is Cain. These are the story of humanity in individual bite-sized chunks. So I think these are always going to be stories that titillate and stimulate the human mind. I think right now the reason that there's a little bit of a boom, because of course, on the one hand, capitalists have noticed that there's a way to kind of stimulate and tickle your audiences by pursuing this financially. But also, I think right now it's something that stimulates in us a very human reaction in a time when we are often lacking the stimulation of the human interaction, the normal human interaction, because we've been kind of insulated from it, and it feels often like we're at arm's length from it. So tuning into true crime is I guess a great way to sort of get that shot of human life into the arm at a low risk sense, right? Like you're not involved in the murder. There's something to be said about how people kind of think through these things and engage in communal, like on Reddit, and in podcast communities. They are, finding community in some of this. I think that's true as well. But there's also just the pure human stimulation that can be found, can be accessed in watching and consuming this kind of art and this kind of true crime, like reality through docuseries and podcasts as well. So that's my theory. I don't think it's incompatible at all with what the great Andrew Klavan just explained and what he explores at book length in The Kingdom of Cain, Finding God in the Literature of Darkness. Make sure to subscribe to the Undercurrents community. Speaking of community, we don't solve murders over at undercurrents.tv, not yet at least, but you do get a weekly email. You get premium episodes just for subscribers every week. And of course, you get an email address to communicate with us directly. We can answer your questions. Maybe you have a murder that you think we should solve. You can send us an email if you sign up over at undercurrents.tv. Also, make sure to subscribe wherever you download your podcasts and over on YouTube if you watch us there as well. Thank you so much for being here. We will be back with more Undercurrents soon.